Alrighty, thank you everyone for joining us today for the microgrid information session on digital twins with Paul Doherty. Today's session is being recorded, so please mute your microphones if you're not speaking and type any questions you have into the chat box. My name is Mike Brisboy. I'm the program lead for the Microgrid Consortium, where we connect individuals and organizations to microgrid projects and discuss new and innovative technologies. We maintain an online portfolio of active members of the consortium and their capabilities. Our key members are Pamela Hamlin, Troy Kunis, Bob Williams, and Dennis Garrett. Today's event is co-sponsored by the IEEE Consultant Network, Melbourne, Florida. I don't know if I see Raul or Earl here. Some upcoming events. We got the Boston Tech Conference and Expo this Friday, starting at 8 o'clock. Title Microgrids Information Session, Wednesday, April 17th at noon. We got the Smart Cities Copenhagen on Tuesday, April 23rd at 7 a.m. Seattle time. Microgrid Consortium breakout session with the Power and Energy Society here in Seattle. We expect 3,500 engineers in town. And finally, we finalized the year with Paul's favorite, the Honolulu Tech Conference and Expo. So mark your calendars for December 6th. So with that, I'd like to introduce our special guest today, Paul Doherty. Is award-winning president and CEO for DigiGroup. He's a registered architect in one of the global industry's most sought-after thought leaders and strategists and integrators of process technology and business. Paul is the founder and CEO for DigiGroup, leading smart cities design, build, operate, and solutions company headquartered in Memphis, Tennessee. He's an author and educator of an analyst and consultant, Fortune 500 organization, government agencies, prominent institution, and also the most prestigious AE&C firms in the world. Paul has spent past 30 years in the industry after graduating cum laude from New York Institute of Technology and graduating from the Career Discovery Program at Harvard University Graduate School of Design. So with that, please welcome Paul Doherty. Paul?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you for all your time today. I'm sure that there's going to be some thoughts and questions based upon the innovations that I'm about to show. So please throw them into the chat. If we don't have time at the end of this hour, I will respond via email to any and all questions. And I think that is part of what the joy of the world of microgrids is going through right now. It's almost like a coming out party, where a lot of the folks that were focused in on much larger scale, district-wide, efforts are now reconsidering things only because we need to start taking a look at our infrastructure, specifically here in the US, it's of an age where we have to reimagine what that means. The idea of doing like a Tennessee Valley Authority, New Deal type of way of having the federal government come in to fix all this, that's not going to happen, not anytime soon, which means that on a local level, we have to start thinking about, and there's going to be the operative word for the next hour, decentralization. Now, decentralization in certain people's minds, especially when it comes to energy, is fraught as a double-edged sword. It can sound really good. It can have certain strategies, but on the other side is, are we really up to it at the local level? And what does that mean? What does it mean for individuals when we start to incorporate things like water and energy solutions inside of a particular, like, let's say, home or office building or hospital? So that's what we're going to discuss today. I'm going to start by sharing my screen here. And my goodness, it actually worked. Here we go. So I've had a history of IEEE and microgrid technologies where I've had some, put it this way, technical challenges when it comes to this. And usually Zoom is really good, but for some reason I'm usually on a Teams call before I get onto a Zoom, and cat fights happen for some reason. So I'm sure you all have your own war stories when it comes to all these newer technologies. So as Mike mentioned, I'm Paul, and I'm a recovering architect. I'm part of a 12-step program in that, and I actually say that with deference to the profession, in that I believe that we're in a world right now that is starting to rethink all of our roles And a lot of that has to do with the technological innovations, the acceptance in the market for people putting on multiple hats on a project because of lack of labor. We've got to get the project done. The projects are becoming more and more higher end when it comes to the performance of, the types of high tech type of buildings is just through the roof. Yet simply putting up buildings, putting in infrastructure, the old days of just knocking it out is no longer there. So we're being challenged across the board. When I created TDG, or what's known as the Digit Group, originally we were consultants that were looking at innovations and how to implement them, both from a performance enhancement, being able to have better productivity, more efficiency, effectiveness inside of architecture, engineering, and construction firms. And then a funny little thing happened in that I was forced into taking control of projects, mostly overseas, that were full-scale real estate developments. So we've merged ourselves into and now have a growth strategy of being known for smart cities, urban environments that can take on design, construction, and operations. It's a very fortunate position to be in. It also comes where I used to have hair. So my hair is no longer there because it is a big deal. But we have certain foundation pieces that we like to be in control of because we can build upon that depending on the stack of needs somewhere on planet Earth. Even within existing cities, the needs of the people of, like, let's say Chicago, are a lot different on the north side than they are on the south side. So we constantly are restacking our ingredients to come up with the proper recipes in order to make these urban environments work. So we have very good expertise in a siloed department called housing, transportation, technology, and energy. This entire conversation is going to be about the idea of smart grids that was originally published in this book called Smart Grids. The section we had was on microgrids and how smart cities can take advantage of that in a decentralized way. By the way, authors make no money, so this isn't about making money. It's about selling the idea. So if you want to learn more, just treat this as a resource. It's not trying to line my pockets, trust me. I originally started here in drafting, hand drafting, being able to have my T squares and all of my templates and all of that stuff, having the intimacy of that medium of paper. In my case, Mylar, right? And the idea was, as you can see here, with butts and elbows, right? That was the calling charge in these drafting pools. And if there was a change, you had to make sure that you really understood your portfolio of all of those drawings and what was connected to what, right? And that actually was a very good exercise, in the same way that I feel that it's very good to learn math with your mind, not with a calculator, right? Well, we fast forward into the world of CAD coming from this, and what we did was created electronic pencils. And it also then frustrated a lot of the information exchange because when you're hand drafting, a more experienced designer could be walking behind you. Maybe during that afternoon, your lettering's a little off, your dimension lines just are not sharp. And he starts to ask questions, or she starts to ask questions. And suddenly there's that exchange of the instincts of a firm that gets passed on. When we went to CAD, that absolutely destroyed a generation because that didn't happen. The best you got were check plots on 11 by 14s, and then they red mark something up, and then you have to go back into your different layers, like let's say in AutoCAD, to make that happen. The reason why I'm going into such depth of the storytelling of this is because we're now being introduced to a new medium, and that new medium is very attractive to the younger generation. When you take a look around your firms and you take a look at how we're teaching and how we're handing off all of our information, our knowledge, our experience, are we doing it in an informal way? Are we doing it in a formal way? Or are we doing it at all? Because the medium has changed. Moving from paper and Mylar and blueprints into the world of CAD was one big jolt. The second one was when we were talking about moving to 3D construction documents, things like building information modeling. I was part of the original team that was called Charles River Software in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that came up with this idea of BIM. We renamed ourselves Revit and we sold ourselves to Autodesk. So yeah, I'm one of those guys to blame. But again, a different medium, a different way of trying to communicate design intent to the builders, the constructors. And now we're into this next wave of moving into a world that can be not produced and not scripted in 3D, because up until now, we had great tools that allowed us to move through this digital space, but it was done through pathways in order to showcase either how a design element should look when complete, or actually just flying through it just to experience what the space is going to look like. A simulated century is what we're calling this century. And it started with that piece of software where you could fly through different types of 3D. But why we're calling this a new medium is because of the way that technology, especially with gaming engines, are now allowing the end user to be the producer and have them experience the space in the way that they would like to. It's no longer scripted. So back in 1996, I was part of a team that was assisting as advisors a 3D studio called Planet Nine Studios in San Francisco. And they were hired by the San Francisco Giants organization to showcase how the new stadium, after the Giants would move from Candlestick Park into downtown San Francisco, what was it going to look like? Because they needed to communicate that design intent to stakeholders like the mayor, city council, people like that. So they came to Planet Nine and said, we really don't want to buy an expensive piece of software, like let's say 3D Max, right? That allows you to do pathways and produce how you move through 3D space. Do you have any ideas? So we knew that there was organizations down in Silicon Valley that were working on a technology that would be a 3D version of HTML. HTML is that hypertext markup language that creates two-dimensional websites with hyperlinks. Well, what these groups were doing, they were creating VRML. This was 1996, virtual reality markup language. And what I decided to do was, after they implemented it correctly, we were able to use a web browser for free to actually showcase to these stakeholders what the design intent was of the new San Francisco Giants baseball stadium. I took some screenshots just for posterity. And what you're going to see here are actually these screenshots from 1996 that was published in my book in 1997. And we called it the Metaverse, 1997. So it's documented, it's historic, and I would love to have all these, kids that are saying, "Hey, we're going to create the metaverse." Why don't you sit down, read a book, and learn? Because we've been doing this a long time, and I think all of us have been working with 3D for a very long time, and we understand that there are processes and limitations with every generation, but the ideas have stuck. And now that the technologies now have crept up on us, and that there's a market need out there to start to attract kids that grew up playing things like Minecraft, Roblox, Fortnite. And now all of a sudden, we're working in BIM, we're working in 3D. Where's those connections going to happen? And this is where we feel that the idea of digital twins, meaning the digital asset as a mirror of what is physically in place, is bringing forward this idea of the simulation century. The simulation century was coined by a friend of mine named Richard Boyd, who used to work at Rockwell and Lockheed Martin. And he was responsible for the 3D imagery of dashboards of fighter jets, right? So if you know that whole, heads up display, that there are no instruments on the actual dashboard of these fighter jets, it's actually all digital. That's Richard and his team. So he understands simulation extremely well at the DoD level. And this idea of digital twins, when we started to communicate, really started to drive some different ways of looking at our built environment. So much so that we have so much digital asset information, both two-dimensional, like in CAD, and 3D with BIM and other types of 3D views, that we're starting to piece this together, that it's not about the individual infrastructure project. It's not about that individual, energy grid. It's not about an individual building. It's about everything. And I love this quote by Leonardo da Vinci that said, "I'm learning how to see that everything is connected to everything." And when you start to have that viewpoint of the digital realm replicating and mirroring what's in the physical world, magical things can start to happen. Better design, simulating different, challenges, disasters, things like safety and security improving in a remarkable way when you benchmark it against how we're doing it today. So this idea that the digital realm comes alive can be seen with the breadcrumbs of what's happening in the consumer market. Like if you use Nest for creating your thermostats inside your home, you understand what I'm talking about, or Ring. Instead of a doorbell, you have Ring, and suddenly there's a camera, and suddenly there's this two-way communication that the world of the digital asset, be it the actual physical ring, or what happens after that person hits the ring. Now all of a sudden you're into a communication, almost like a Zoom, when I could be half a world away, but I'm talking with the person that's in front of my house. Now all of a sudden everything that's affected in the physical world is coming from the digital world and vice versa. Because what happens then in the physical world will absolutely start to talk to and communicate with the digital world. This is the new medium. It's no longer a static photograph of a two-dimensional floor plan or an electric grid layout in abstract or a three-dimensional view of the world. It's now active and interactive, and I think this is the real promise about how we can start to take this new medium and bring it with all of our collective experience on this call to another level. So much so when I start to take a look at all the different power generation places, and then understanding that there are limitations with every one of these about the distribution. Well, that has been really the big problem, hasn't it been, in the world of energy? There's a lot of great ideas, this idea of solar. Fantastic idea. Guess what? It's at a 28 to 20, 23 to 28% efficiency factor at the best installations on the planet. We have to start reimagining what that means. Putting up a bunch of solar panels, it's kind of like dating a mannequin. It looks real good, but there's nothing there, right? I mean, let's be real about this. And then I love the fact that there are people diving into that problem and trying to solve it. I met this one gentleman that has I believe it's 100 square miles, something like that. It's a crazy amount of space north of Las Vegas that over the past 10 years, he's been talking about using biomimicry by using the water aquifer that is just under the ground that can actually then take the captured solar power and use that as a distribution mechanism to go that 100 miles so that we're no longer thinking about the old world of transmission towers and wires above ground. Let's use nature to actually transmit that. And he's been highly successful at this thing. And I'm just like, well, that's a new one on me. Never heard of that before, but let's go explore. Same thing with what's happening with, the unfortunate implementation of these, with the wind farms under this administration. And not to get political, it's just that it's happening during this administration where, these wind farms off the coast of New York, New Jersey, they're having a real issue with trying to get the power back onto coast. And I know I'm giving you like headline news, Business Insider type of headlines, but this is what the public is reading. So when they hear about innovative ways of having energy, there's a lot of these naysayers out there that are hopping on these headlines and saying, see, I told you so. I don't believe that. I think that there are ways of taking different types and forms of this first wave of new energy, be it water with hydro, be it wind, be it solar, and we can actually do something better with it and actually get this next level of 2.0, which then starts the question of, well, when the digital twins get involved, could we simulate instead of spending the hundreds of millions of dollars to wind up going 23 to 28% efficiency? That's not really what we were going for. What can we do better? So that's where this new medium, this idea of calling things out in a way where everything is connected to everything, that when you make a decision, we're starting to see things as urban designers that I really didn't think forward before. But now, because I have these tools of digital twins and I can actually do simulations, I'm now starting to ask better questions, such as, in my opinion, in the future, the Department of Transportation will merge with Housing and Urban Development because they are contingent on each other. They are so intertwined that they don't even realize it. But when you start to learn to see again, everything's connected to everything, because when you put a home along then with a community in place, how is it they're going to get to things that they need for every day, be it groceries, be it dry cleaning, be it their work? And now with the hybrid of work, what does that mean? Where are you with work. I know I can do more work on on an iPhone than I could 10 years ago physically being somewhere. So this whole idea of workplace combined with how to get there, how to get home, how to actually transport goods, products, services, and people is irreparably tied together to the built environment in a huge way, including the layout of cities. In some of our layouts, specifically in Malaysia and South Africa, we don't have a grid. We don't need a grid because most of our transportation is autonomous vehicles. Interesting, right? Because now we're not relying on the Cartesian coordinates of being right there, and then we have to fit our real estate into a square or a rectangle plot. I mean, that's so 2023. Now we have a different way of utilizing that space so that I'm placing the buildings where they should be because of that spot on the planet Earth. Again, that idea of stacking, right? And the idea then is if we can take these buildings and place them properly, are we now starting to take a look at the overall building envelope as an energy generator with micro blades so that we can actually have wind, but it's hitting the wind because we've placed those buildings properly. Maybe it's next to the coast, and twice a day we're getting the offshore winds and the inshore winds constantly coming back and forth, and we've created our own wind tunnel. That's the type of innovation that we're looking at, that when everything is connected to everything, well, then we need to have a nomenclature. We need to have a taxonomy that creates categories so that we can actually get our heads around everything and connected to everything. There was a movie 2 years ago, I believe it won the Academy Award, called Everything Everywhere All at Once. And that's exactly where the energy sector is today, because we're smack now in the middle of visualizations that are now attracting a younger generation to go, what's this about? Isn't this a great way of recruiting? Because as you can see from this particular model, which is a model that we used to design and build and operate the Expo 2020 in Dubai, this was actually then retrofitted and reimagined to be the location for this past December's COP28 in Dubai. And we went through a series of showcasing how we can do photorealistic simulations, but that's only for a certain type of role and audience member. Again, this is an entire new medium that we can choose to showcase things that are very visual, very, very photorealistic and wow, right? But there's going to be other times when we need just a schematic, right? Because that's the medium that communicates the best. And so taking into account that we could just need like a 2D riser diagram or something as, heavy as this photorealistic model, there's all of these different ways of viewing this medium based on roles that needs to be in one place. And then depending on your role, that's the type of medium or the type of level of experience and level of engagement, level of detail that comes to you. So as we start to go through this idea of a virtual world being driven by digital twins, we have to take into account this new emergence of spatial computing, which is definitely going to take into this idea of decentralized ways of taking microgrids and enabling them to work, both from a governance aspect, from an operational aspect, and from a continuous improvement aspect. So this idea of digital twins, again, just being a mirror of what's there, when you start to take those digital twins and put them onto a gaming engine, like the way that gamification happens, right? Be it the Unreal Engine, Unity, any of these types of tools allow the end user to have the experience of moving through either a level of detail, a level of engagement, or a level of an experience based on their wants and needs. So when we start to take all these virtual worlds, you can imagine, the thousands, the tens of thousands, the hundreds of thousands, the millions of virtual worlds. How do they all communicate together? Well, that's the big problem right now. If you are a person that has an account with like, let's say a game like World of Warcraft, if you wanted to use your same character in Fortnite, you can't do it. Why? Because the almighty dollar. They're saying that they want you to spend your money and your subscription in those virtual worlds that they created. The world of spatial computing, though, is now challenging the digital world of gaming. So much so that this past January in Davos during the World Economic Forum, there was a huge public announcement that there is an open code, open sourced way of starting to communicate between these virtual worlds. We ran into a very similar problem in 2D until Tom Berners-Lee came up with the idea of a graphic web browser. And that spawned the entire World Wide Web, right? Because now people could visualize things, and they created this protocol called HTTP, or Hypertext Transfer Protocol. That's why back in the day, you always had to put HTTP, right, colon slash slash www dot, and then whatever your domain was. Well, HTTP was meant to create hyperlinks so that I could be working in one type of world, my web page, and I could talk to other worlds or other web pages in a 2D way. What was announced at Davos was HSTP, Hyperspace Transfer Protocol. Wow. So now we can actually have a three-dimensional way of creating three-dimensional hyperlinks so that I can actually communicate between these virtual worlds. These are the cow paths that will eventually come to fruition as what people described as the metaverse. This new medium, this new way of looking at things and working in 3D, either immersively, which is still in a nascent way coming around, especially with Apple and their Vision Pro, of course, Meta, Facebook with their Quest 2. There's some movement, but it's still not there yet, and will take a generation or two of technological improvement to get there. But in the meantime, we do have augmented experiences, being able to have things like what you're looking at this particular Zoom meeting, right? Those either desktop units or your screen that's hooked into, your laptop, whatever that is, that's still the new medium, right? Also, the idea of augmentation can also be done through things like smartphones and tablets. So we're starting to get there about linking these things together so that it makes sense. And this becomes a real challenge for all of us because now we can actually attach really good information that allows that particular unit that could be an energy generation system unit, right? That will then talk to another unit across the street. And it can be all done through HSTP because it's spatially recognizing things, not two-dimensionally recognizing a spot on a web page. That's the big breakthrough. This is what we're calling the metaverse ecosystem. And we're right smack right at the beginning of this. We learned a lot from Fortnite about how all this works. We've been very fortunate to work with these folks to start to explain how do people actually interact then with this new medium, right? And what we're finding is that it's not just, a mouse, it's just not a stylus, it's not your hand movements. It's about creating a virtual representation of yourself. It could be a digital twin that they call avatars, and we can start to see how that use happens in TV and film production, about how they're using avatars with really cool algorithms that help speed along production process. Some people are calling it large language models, other people are dumping it into this huge bucket called artificial intelligence and AI. At the end of the day, what it is machine learning. It's constantly learning and picking up on trends and different types of patterns so that it can make faster decisions over time. This means that this new medium needs this new interface of this avatar. And here's a very simple example. So with everyone's iPhones from the iPhone 12 Pro to today's iPhone 15, there's this little app called Measure. And when you see the back of your phone that looks like it's all cameras, it's not all cameras. There's actually one that's a LiDAR sensor. So what it does is instead of measuring just it emits light and it bounces off surfaces so that you can start to take into account a three-dimensional space, and it starts to build what's called a point cloud. This is done in seconds, right? So that when you measure, you're getting the measurement. But what's also cool is that you can build a 3D model through that. In this case, and that's called reality capture, right? In this case, what you're seeing here is an example of using very similar technology, but it's capturing motion or mocap, motion capture, so that you can actually now take a script and actually have someone use a phone and actually capture how you walk, your gait, right? How you play basketball. This guy in red looks like that he's playing for UConn, just to say. But at the end of the day, it starts to capture certain elements that are unique to you. Now, what gets cool about that is that now we can start to take a look at how the gaming industry works, and we can start now to have this new medium and this new interface becomes something that we can put into what Epic Games is calling humanoids, where instead of being a pixelated representation of yourself, like what you saw on the last slide, you can take like a GoPro camera and actually start to capture how you smile. Do you get dimples when you smile? Do you squint? Or what are all these different things when you're happy, you're sad, all these different emotions, and now captured that over time, your metahuman becomes the avatar. These are two very important elements I just talked about for the past 30 minutes, meaning that we have this new medium called the 3D virtual world that will become the metaverse, along with a new interface that allows us to put things like blockchain, which helps to create a golden thread that we trust the data that's being presented to us, because the code is no longer, the data is no longer something that you put into like a PDF field, right? That could have bias to it. But it says from a factual element, like let's say with a smart contract, just create that case study. If if I say I'm Paul and Mike says he's Mike, we actually can say, okay, we agree with that. Let's put it in the smart contract. It does not get put into a field, it gets written into the software code. That's why it's immutable. Now imagine every transaction that you do with any sort of decision gets written into the code. You can now trust it. It cannot be changed. And everyone has agreed that that is the information at that moment in time that everyone agrees to. That means now we have fertile data that can now be used for things like machine learning, large language models, GPT, all these different types of ways of creating an environment that we can trust, which means that the new medium becomes our brain trust. This is where the idea of microgrids and energy comes smack in the face with water. One thing I've learned by working with the different municipalities around the world is that, for the most part, the largest user of energy is the water company, and the largest user of water is the power company. Isn't that an interesting relationship? Which means that when we start to take a look at innovations, we're starting to take a look at, well, how can things like AI start to improve that process? Because we can bring down the usage on one side, it definitively affects the other side, so that we can start to load balance all the way down to a decentralized system that makes sense. So I'm really fond of this particular phrase that I prompt, therefore I am. This whole idea that I just mentioned about bringing things down and starting to say that everyone's connected to everything, it's called singularity, which means that the worlds of prompts are going to become very important in our lexicon on how we work. Prompts are now used and will continue to be used through avatars, or they can be used through interfaces. And what that means is that I can actually talk to a machine that's been trained, quote unquote, trained with taxonomy, with nomenclature, with things that make sense to the microgrid community, so that it can now start to respond back in kind by learning how we work, and more importantly, where those KPIs are. Where is the preferred future of our designs? How can we actually get there? And it can start to provide cow paths. Maybe not, it's a little bit more than breadcrumb trails, but at least cow paths, but not the Autobahn. We're not there yet, and we won't be for at least another generation or two. But here's some examples about how we've started to use, AI, using this idea that it becomes a way of creating these virtual worlds, this new medium, in ways that we haven't thought about before, because it gives us the preciousness of saving time. It may not be 100% correct, but we are getting about 75% there, that allows then the professional to take over. In this case, this is by OpenAI, the same people behind ChatGPT, called DALL-E 2. We actually are using DALL-E 3 now, but here's a simple thing. I actually go in, I just start giving some keywords or prompts to say, I want to create a natural looking facility that's very lush, like in a rainforest. And I want it to be spectacular. I want it shot in the afternoon. And these are the graphic ideas that they give me for inspiration. Are they 100% there yet? No, and I don't want them to be. But you can start to see how through pre-design, we start to take a look at different ways of how we can go down those cow paths. This is Mid-Journey. I use this one a lot. This one actually allows us through prompting to get at least 4 images to start us on our path, right? In this case, here's what a prompt looks like. In this case, it's a function called /imagine, and then you can see it says prompt. But what you do is you put words in there, and how you actually then guide the machine to get to a preferred future is going to be a talent. Some people are calling it prompt engineering, prompt architecture. In this case, I said, show me Paul as Batman. And this is what it gave me. So sometimes I don't like AI a lot, but there you go, double-edged sword, right? But I think that, this is where the world of things like spatial computing become very important. And this actually drives directly down into energy sources and energy distribution. In this case, I'm going to show you an example from the world's #1 airport, Changi Airport in Singapore, of how they're starting to use this idea of spatial computing, allowing the digital twins to be that interface, and how we start to solve real business problems. So in this case, we're showing a quick shot of the Bund in Shanghai just to show what a digital twin can look like. Sometimes photorealistic, sometimes not. As you can see here, almost like a schematic type of thing. But the idea is that you can take CAD and BIM and start to superimpose other media into this as a single point of truth, which means that when we start to take a look at all the different ways of, from video to actual SCADA information, all the way through the actual construction document itself, the idea of putting Web3 technologies, everything from robotics, as you can see here, the controlling of the physical world, which is bi-directional, back into the digital world, becomes a brand new white canvas. In this case, we were starting to take a look at how do we control crowds from the aspect of not herding them into somewhere, but how can we start to get out ahead of it by simulating security issues, safety issues, those types of things. The idea of what we did for Changi is actually we took the construction documentation and the facility management information, and we can actually then break things out into analytics that helped what? The actual retail store itself. You have a product placement, how many people stopped and took a look. All of those different analytics became very, very important, so much so that when we then took the data layers and started to superimpose them into places like this that provided a way of showcasing how the power generation at Changi was actually being optimized. It became a really, really interesting play, again, of everything connected to everything. The way that we're starting to take a look at things like biometrics and being able to hook that into work conditions, like someone fell, someone got hurt, and the building alerts the people to that particular situation. I think these are the things that we're going to, have to start getting our heads around, that the stuff is here because we're looking at an industrialized metaverse where these folks, especially on the utility side of things, are taking a decentralized approach. So let's get down into some weeds here. I have a friend that runs this group out of Lexington, Kentucky called Square One Technologies. Um, this was originally meant to be for water treatment and water solutions. Keep in the back of your mind, water and energy are kind of like transportation in the built environment. They're very, very close in this new world. Okay. So Square One Technologies actually came about because the inventor of a technology called Dr. Tim Finfrock was working for a large defense contractor that was contracted actually through NASA. And outside his side gig, he created a patent that would actually take a look at water, and by using nuclear types of ways of taking the elements of water, so the two H's and the O, and separating them to create a free radical, he was able actually to clean the water around it because the free radical gets excited and wants to come back together again, right? So he worked on it, worked on it, worked on it, came up with it on his own, brought it into Rockwell and NASA. And this is the system that's used in the International Space Station to take care of all of the astronauts' waste, right? So it becomes a circular type of way of looking at this. He was granted a product now. It's no longer exclusive to the ISS, and he's now productized it called Square One Technologies. He has an NGO called Water for the World, And what he's done is that he's created about the size of a roller bag this particular 14-step process that breaks apart the polluted water, and it's any sort of pollution. It could be leachable water, it could be human waste, yada yada yada. Breaks it apart, comes back together again in this process, and actually then nutrients are put back into it so that it actually becomes a vending machine for pure water. This is way beyond reverse osmosis, much better, much cleaner, and it is something that's affordable. So right now, they are implementing this in Kenya to actually be part of every home in a village and town. Right now, there's 2,800 units that have been distributed. The cool part about this is that there's wireless systems that are put into this for analytics, for the functionality, being able to make sure that the O&Ms are being taken care of, and any sort of need for new filters, that type of thing, can be communicated all the way back to Kentucky from Kenya. So what these units do as they're placed is that they're creating a wireless mesh network that self-polices itself, creates fresh water from polluted water, and becomes also a point of sale using digital payment. Right now, the cost for a liter of water in sub-Saharan Africa averages about $1, and that's from Nestle and all these different groups. Um, right now, they're reselling this Square One Technology water for under 15 cents a liter. So they're undercutting the market and they're making a 100% EBITDA on this. So great business model, really cool technology, but here's the kicker. So I went to go visit them. These are my personal photographs from their warehouse in Kentucky. And Dr. Finfrock said, I think you'd want to see something here because you're all into this idea of water and energy. I said, yeah. So what you're seeing here is a video of the same unit after it's cleaned the water, and then it pushes all of that energy, meaning the separation of the H2 and the O, into a bottle of water. Now, if you were to do that with, with a straw, you'd have oxygenated bubbles. These are hydrogen bubbles, very dense, which means when you actually come into any active flame or energy source, it only draws 0.78 amps, but it actually creates mini explosions, which then drives turbines. You're talking about one of the first that I've seen in reality, this idea of hydrogen gas being used in a micro way to actually then generate enough energy, not just for one building, but upwards of 6 different units in its first MVP, its minimal viable product. Now, the idea of the water is that it's a decentralized way of not having to create a wastewater treatment plant that could be $100 million, right? And sewer lines and all that stuff. It goes away. We're now looking to do the same thing with hydrogen energy based upon this water-based hydrogen energy generation, then that gets put right next to the water unit. And that now all of a sudden becomes this microgrid. So right now we're exploring, and I'll show you some of the projects we're working on with this about testing it, right? Because we got to crawl first to make sure, number one, that this technology is airtight. Because if this is done the right way, I expect assassins to come after me by, from large energy companies because we just put them out of business. But, so no one wanted to put the guy that shoveled coal into the locomotive out of business, but here you go. Right. So it's the first time that I've seen something like this. I don't know if anyone, here has seen something like this, but this is all coming from a water-based solution that now all of a sudden is really working well. And what's happening right now is that this MVP process has another 24 months or so to actually go through its iterations. But this is where I think the rubber meets the road. So some of the projects that we've already designed with this decentralized way of, quite frankly, redefining and reimagining a microgrid is a project like this. This is the Numaraba. This is a project in Riyadh. It's a 400 meters squared facility that is its own district within Riyadh that is the equivalent of being able to house 20 Empire State Buildings. This is meant to be an iconic building. It has some functionality, it has hospitality, retail, food, beverage, things like that. But it's meant to go visit to actually immerse yourself into this new medium. Isn't that amazing, right? This whole idea of virtual worlds so that you can experience things from Riyadh all over the world. So if you wanted to go and see things, because a lot of people in Saudi can't afford to actually go overseas. but how about if we bring overseas to you? And then what would happen if we would have fantastical ways of redefining retail through holographics, through these worlds, this collision of digital and physical worlds. So you could see why they would be very, very interested in learning more, not just about the water decentralized system, but the energy decentralized system, because they have a huge amount of need to make that happen. They know that they don't have enough time to to slowly move to get into a new paradigm, quite frankly, where their entire economy, their society is built around petroleum. They only have a finite amount of time to get out of that, and they're using projects like this to showcase that they will do it, over time. This is another project in Qingdao, China. This is a virtual reality theme park, one of my favorite projects, because it helped us challenge the former Imagineers from Walt Disney who we hired to come in and rethink pavilions, rethink experiences, rides, things like that. When you put the virtual world, our new medium for our industry, into an entertainment type of place, meaning that what used to happen was you used to go into a pavilion and do a Mickey Mouse ride and come out into a retail shop and you were done. What happens when you stick the virtual world in here where you don't even need the pavilion, where the spaces between the pavilion actually become the stage for other types of journeys and experiences and that type of thing? Now, the reason why this one became important is, Saudi, China is hell bent on trying to not follow the Western world into a reliance only on things like coal and petroleum. They're stumbling, fumbling like all of us, but they are trying, and they have an immense amount, hundreds of billions of dollars, to take a look at decentralized systems. Here's a quick photograph of progress of from a few months ago. So this thing is coming up out of the ground. The infrastructure is in place, and this will be a great showcase and use case for microgrids. Here's another one. Also, this is one of the world's largest TV and film studios digitally, right outside of Seoul, South Korea. It's meant for Netflix Korea, the people that brought you Squid Games, that crazy show. So they're going to be doing more shows like that. This was meant to show how we also are breaking away from the traditional grid and relying on energy and water in place. So again, that idea about getting to net zero, I don't know if anyone will ever truly get there, but we're doing our best to actually put our foot forward from an infrastructure standpoint to actually make that work. The other things that I wanted to discuss, and I can open it up to, for questions is, I've been asked a lot about, robotics. We have a close relationship in with, organizations like Boston Dynamics and others that are working towards getting to, robotics that can help the bottom line. So I was very impressed with what Stanley Black and Decker were working on with remote bobcats that can go into places that would have high workman's comp issues, like demolition people. I really like the robots that are being worked on for roofing, especially with anyone that has any type of, angled roof that needs asphalt shingles put on top. That's a big workman's comp issue. So anything with high-end workman's comp seems that it should go this way. Here's the problem. We could actually train a lot of these robots, especially with AI involved with them, that they know their roles, they know their responsibilities, they have their work packages, get to work. This begs that, people who say, yeah, but AI is taking my job. It's like, no, people using AI will take your job. Absolutely. But it's only a tool. Because what we're finding is we need people like on this call to actually be there with the instincts and the experience and the knowledge to actually know how to manage crews. So managing robotic crews are probably even more difficult than people crews, believe it or not, only because they're too perfect. They're too perfect. And we're not perfect. We understand that, someone's got to leave the job early on your crew because, they got to pick their kid up at school because the other kid is with the mom and is at the doctor's. Things happen, right? That's not going to happen with robots. And I'm going to come up with a story here that I think can be very analogous to the fears sometimes people have when they start to think about the futures in these things. When things get too perfect, it sounds too perfect. So I was in the music industry before I went to school. I was part of a band that was signed to Warner Brothers Records. I was a keyboard player, and I used Yamaha synthesizers. Yamaha, and I joined this group that Yamaha put together called the Musical Interface Digital Interface Group, MIDI. MIDI is how electronic instruments can talk to things like drum machines and the lights for concerts and all this stuff. It's how the music industry works today, right? Well, back in the day, this is the late 80s, there's this thing called the SMPTE code, and it just keeps time, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, so that a drummer could put, an earpiece in his ear and hear the SMPTE code and know that I'm going to be in sync, and then the guitarist and the bass player would all be in synchronous, right? Um, that was cool until we started going into the recording studio. And my stuff, I was able to get it to a point where I only had one take because I would just put in my Mac Pro, my, my first Macintosh, right? And I would put this in and it would be perfect. Boom. And it was put to the SMPTE code, but we also started using drum machines. And what we got was a syncopated, absolutely perfect piece of music that didn't have any soul. It was too perfect. So we had to learn and how to put in how to make mistakes into computers. In other words, could you be a half a millisecond late on that snare drum so that it had more of a feel, right? And we still did that up until the time that we broke up the band. And it was always this unrealized dream of how does a computer become more human-like? That's where we're at right now with all of this technology. In that, how can we make it so that it becomes more, well, human? And how human do you want it to be? Because we're all fallible. But what are the limitations? Where are those areas that we can take control of these things and understand that it's not too perfect, it's just perfect. And that's going to be something that I know for the rest of our careers we're going to be literally, striving for, but I don't think we'll ever achieve. So with that, I wanted to showcase a couple of other resources. Actually, almost a year ago, this book came out on smart cities about reimagining the urban experience. Some of the things I talked about here today are in that book, and if you need further information, please go there. This past December, two books in one year. I was definitely a person that was looking for pain. Was this book called "Unlocking the Metaverse: A Strategic Guide for the Future of the Built Environment," published by John Wiley and Sons. The cool part about this is that this definitely talks to a lot of things I talked about, a lot of the theory, a lot of the actual case studies. But what becomes important about this book is that this fall, I'm going to be creating its own virtual world. So you just don't read the book, you experience the book. So that's going to be an interesting twist on this. We're actually also negotiating with the National Building Museum, where we are looking to unleash a lot of this into that beautiful, beautiful building on the inside to start to have the general public understand that there is a cyber physical relationship out there and that we as the professionals need to get our heads around what does this really mean, especially with one of the biggest foundations, the energy issue. We also run a podcast called Elevated Business with my business partner, Marbu Dennis, and we do call ourselves twins. I am the whitest white guy on the planet. I'm Irish. And obviously, Marbu is not, but we have a singularity of mind and spirit. So if you want, you can hear some really, really cool guests that we have on there that talk into this world, as we start to journey together. So with that, Mike, I'm going to open it up for questions. I guess we have, about 5, 7 minutes left. And just want to thank you for inviting me in here and sharing some of our stories.
Okay, do we have any questions from the audience?
And I think we
So,
have some chats
lo-
here.
is there anything in the chat? So, I mean, there's a lot of thinking to go on. Some of the points, more better efficient DERs was distributed energy resources, and then more big data, bring in the weather, bring in all the statistics. So, I guess question to you, Paul, is from the microgrid standpoint, we have um, hydrogen, solar planners, architects, we have engineers, microgrid controller folks. Where do we get started? How do we take our next step? Um,
And this is always the chicken and the egg, isn't it? Right? Because usually, especially as engineers, we're tasked with a challenge, and we usually have a bunch of solutions over here, and some are tried and true and tested that we trust. Right now, how do you trust something and how do you make something that has never been done before and create that pioneering spirit, right? Which is why a lot of times we partner up with academia, just because it allows us the freedom to fail and fail often, fail quickly,
Yeah.
but learn, right? So from a business aspect, a lot of this stuff can be high risk, but in other cases, when we're talking about NGOs where there's a real need for helping people and making an impact, I think that that provides a longer runway for the acceptance of the challenges that are before us. In the case of Kenya, we're working with the NGO there that is not working directly with the government. What I've learned about sub-Saharan Africa is that it was all carved up by by the Dutch, by the English, by the Portuguese, by all these different groups. And they did it almost haphazardly. It was almost like wheeling and dealing, right? But it really had nothing to do with the people on the ground, the indigenous tribes, where they broke up tribes because one's in Sierra Leone, the other one's in the Ivory Coast. Yet they want to get together, but the government says no, right? Like
Mhm.
what? And the fact that those governments put in without context, well, now all of a sudden you're talking about corruption, which is why it's rampant. Whenever you hear Africa going, yeah, good luck with that, right? It's the reason why we get Nigerian cousins that say that your uncle died, and if you give him 2,500 bucks, you get all these millions. I mean, all these scams and all this stuff. But that's not the Africa I see. The Africa I see is actually built around those tribes, and the tribes actually trust very few things, but they do trust the missionary Christians. So how we work and actually how we get things done in Africa is actually working through those back channels to get the people to trust. Now, all of a sudden, the government, we do special things with the government in order to not kill the programs. But when they see it working and they can claim credit, then everyone wins, right? So really what it comes down to is that depending on where on the planet Earth we are being brought into and knowing that we have this amazing amount of ingredients, the innovations, we have to pick and choose and be careful about how we then start the implementation process, both from pre-design, which means the simulations become really, really important in order to gain either, yes, let's go forward with this, or this needs a little bit more study, right? So when it comes to this idea of energy, decentralized energy inside of a microgrid, what we're finding is that once the people see it and use it, they don't want to go back. It's like the genie's out of the bottle, right? And at that point, then it's up to us. It's almost like we've been pushing the boulder up the hill so long. All of a sudden, the boulder's coming out after us like Indiana Jones, right? So we have to be careful about those wants and needs and the market conditions. But one thing that I will say really provides a lot of satisfaction, is money is money. I've been very fortunate that money was pretty easy, right? But that's not the goal. The goal is making an impact. And our organization is all about that. And we're not bleeding hearts either. I mean, I'm born in New York City, hard-nosed Yankee fan. I will make my money. But at the end of the day, if you make an impact as well, well, that actually gives it some meaning. It makes me bound out of bed. And I think that, for the most part, I wish that in business, we would not shy away from the word because it is misused and it's used as both a shield and a sword. But, as we do our work, I think we are very heroic in what we do as an industry. There are only three things that the human body needs to survive on this space vessel called Earth, and that is fresh water,
Yeah.
safe food, and shelter. And we contribute to shelter. So that nobility means, shouldn't we be proud about that? So when we are talking with the people, the end users of all of this stuff that we do every day, all the technological information we have of what we do now, an eye towards the future, which was really what this session was about. I think the operative word is love. And the fact that we shy away from it in business, I think we need to start breaking that down. Love of thyself, love of work, love of your fellow colleagues, and love of people, right? Because that is the passion that I think is going to drive out a lot of this idea of scarcity. So,
Mhm.
you're saying, how do you do it? I think we come from a mindset of abundance. And if you have that positive energy, the projects find you. And that's the
Mhm.
best thing I can talk about, Mike, because some people call me Forrest Gump. because I've just had this amazing career of just being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah.
I call it just being Irish and lucky.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like you said, we're looking for the win-win. We're a consortium, so we all come together trying to help everyone. But like you said, sometimes you can't satisfy everyone all at the same time. But like you said, dropping some of those, increasing some of those efficiency, looking for DERs that are more efficient. I think that's a great thing that the digital twin or the AI can help us with. We have a lot of people in the group also that do the disruptive technology, so we can maybe push those guys a little hardest to get out in front. So, but yeah, at the end of the day, when the dust settles, we're looking for the, the perfect microgrid in the perfect location, and which ones do we use to make the maximum power output. So we got a lot of folks pushing, certain types of projects, certain type of products, and which may not be the best for the client, but we're trying to, sing kumbaya and make sure that the whole thing going forward is workable for the client, and in the long term, sometimes we use the energy as a service where we, let somebody else take the responsibility and then provide the client the energy that they need at the right time. So
Well, I want to thank you, Mike, for inviting me in on here for this. It definitely is not your typical IEEE or microgrid technologies type of
right.
presentation, but I'm hoping it did one big thing, that anyone that says that they have it all figured out at this point, run the other way, because we're
Okay.
all learning here. We're
Sure.
all learning. So thank you for providing an environment to
Sooner
learn.
the better. Thanks, Paul.
Bye bye, everybody.
One last thing, where can folks get a hold of you?
Oh, uh, okay. Probably the best way is LinkedIn.
Okay.
Underneath my name, Paul Doherty, and I'm with TDG or the Digit Group. And you could also take a look at the at the website, and all all the contact information is there, and that's the Digit Group Inc.com. So I appreciate that, Mike.
Thanks, Paul. We're signing off from Seattle, Washington, for the Microgrid Consortium. Next month, we're going to showcase all our consortium members, so that should be exciting. So we'll see you next month on, I think it's May not May 8th, May 8th. So we'll see you then. Thanks, Paul.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, bye bye.